Welcome to the channel of science fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. Enjoy listening. The bar was alive with sound, a symphony of voices in a dozen languages, punctuated by the clink of glass and the low hum of alien music. Gorzarak sat alone at his table, a hulking figure draped in the shadows of the dim lighting. His skin, a deep emerald hue mottled with dark scars, caught the occasional flicker of neon lights from the bar's swirling advertisements. Around him, beings from across the galaxy drank, argued, and traded stories, but Gorzarak paid them no mind. His attention was fixed on his glass, a viscous amber liquid swirling inside, as if the answers to his haunted thoughts lay somewhere at the bottom. The Gorzarak warrior's mandibles clicked softly as he finally spoke, his voice low and gravelly. "You want to know about humans? Truly know about them?" His glowing yellow eyes lifted from the glass, locking onto a group of curious listeners who had gathered around. They were a mixed bunch: traders, mercenaries, drifters. Most of them had heard of humans, but few had encountered them in the flesh. To Gorzarak, their naivety was almost endearing. "Let me tell you a story," he said, leaning back in his chair. The tension in his powerful frame was still palpable, like a spring wound too tightly. "A story of how my battalion, the finest in the Gorzarak Defense Legion, was destroyed. Not by a fleet, not by a horde, but by a handful of humans." The bar grew quieter. Even the patrons who had no interest in humans seemed drawn to the gravity in Gorzarak's tone. He swirled his drink again, took a long sip and began. "We were stationed on Drexis 9, a planet rich in tritium ore, vital for hyperdrive cores. It was a contested world, of course. The coalition of species claimed it as a neutral territory, but neutrality means nothing to those desperate for resources. My people, the Gorzarak, were tasked with securing the largest mining facility on the planet. With our technology and numbers, it should have been a simple operation, and for weeks it was. The humans had sent their delegation, a pitiful force of diplomats and a token military presence. Or so we thought." Gorzarak's mandibles clicked together sharply, a sound that made a few of his listeners flinch. He set his glass down with a deliberate thud. "It started small. Power outages in our communication arrays, minor delays in supply shipments. At first, we thought it was incompetence on the part of our logistics crews. Then came the sabotage, mining equipment destroyed, patrols vanishing without a trace. We increased security, doubled our perimeter patrols, but it didn't matter. Every step we took, they were already 3 ahead." His voice lowered, as if speaking the next part was physically painful. "And then the ambush came. They struck at night during a storm. Humans thrive in chaos. They use it as cover, as a weapon. Their leader, Captain Rowan Locke, was a master of such tactics. He drew us into a trap, a narrow canyon where our numbers meant nothing. The humans moved like shadows, their attacks precise and devastating." The listeners leaned in closer. Gorzarak's hands curled into fists, his claws digging into the table. "Specialist Elena Cruz. She's the one who took out our forward artillery post. She planted charges so expertly that our engineers didn't detect them until it was too late. When the explosives went off, it wasn't just the post that was destroyed. The shockwave triggered a landslide, cutting off our main escape route." His glowing eyes flickered toward one of his listeners, a small insectoid trader who seemed transfixed. "Then there was Sergeant Marco Delaney, the sniper. I never saw him, but I felt his presence in every step I took. He picked off our officers one by one, demoralizing our forces. A single shot, always precise, always fatal." Gorzarak's voice grew darker, tinged with a mix of anger and respect. "Private Tasha Singh, a tech specialist. She turned our own systems against us. Doors locked when we needed to retreat. Automated defenses firing on our own troops. She even disabled our orbital support, leaving us stranded." He took another long sip of his drink. the liquid catching the light as it slid down his throat. And finally, Corporal Ethan Wren, their scout. He found paths we didn't think existed. Every ambush, every maneuver was his doing. We were the hunters, and he turned us into prey. The bar was silent now, the usual clamor replaced by the quiet hum of machinery and the faint echo of Yazurik's words. His gaze swept over the crowd, his expression unreadable. "You're probably wondering how I survived. Luck, if you believe in such things. My unit was tasked with holding the rear, ensuring our main force could regroup. By the time we realized the humans' true strategy, it was too late. The battalion was wiped out. I'll never forget the sight of their bodies. Scattered across the canyon, our pride reduced to ash. Yazurik's mandibles clicked again, this time slower, more deliberate. The humans didn't fight us like soldiers, they fought us like predators. They didn't match our strength, they exploited our weaknesses. Every step we took, every tactic we employed, they countered with something unexpected. And when it was over, they left. Not to claim the planet, not to revel in their victory. They left because they had already made their point. He leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the table. Humans are dangerous not because of their weapons, not because of their numbers. They're dangerous because they adapt. They learn. And when they're pushed into a corner, they become something even the strongest of us fear. One of the listeners, a reptilian mercenary, finally broke the silence. What happened to them, the humans who did this? Yazurik's gaze dropped back to his glass, and for a moment he seemed lost in thought. Captain Locke and his team vanished after the battle. Some say they went back to their fleet, hailed as heroes. Others claim they disbanded, their mission complete. Me? I think they're still out there, waiting for the next time someone underestimates them. He finished his drink in one final gulp, the glass clinking softly as he set it down. So, if you ever find yourself on the wrong side of a human troop, remember this. It's not the size of the force that matters. It's the mind behind it. Yazurik's glowing eyes shifted to the door as a silence fell over the group. But the story wasn't complete, and Yazurik's heavy frame did not rise. He leaned forward again, letting his claws rake softly over the polished surface of the table. You'd think that'd be the end of it, wouldn't you? The proud Gorzarak left to lick their wounds while humans disappeared into the darkness. But you'd be wrong. That battle, it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. He motioned for another drink, the amber liquid arriving quickly as his listeners sat entranced. He sipped slowly, collecting his thoughts, the room dense with anticipation. After the humans disappeared, the Gorzarak command was livid. They refused to believe that our battalion had been bested by a handful of humans. The official report called it an act of cowardice, a failure to adapt. Those of us who lived, and there weren't many, were scattered, sent to distant outposts, or buried under endless patrol duties. The truth of that defeat was buried deeper than Drexis Nine's minds. His mandibles clicked rhythmically, a sign of frustration or unease. But the truth doesn't stay buried for long. News of humans and their unorthodox tactics began spreading through the outer sectors. The same strategy they used on Drexis 9 began appearing in conflicts across coalition territories. Small surgical teams taking on forces far larger and better equipped. It wasn't long before the name Locke became whispered in council chambers. To some it was a ghost story, to others it was a warning. Yazurik's voice dropped to a near whisper, the glow of his eyes intensifying. And then came the transmissions, the ones we intercepted from a drifting human outpost. Locke's voice, clear as I hear my own now. We're not looking to rule. We're looking to survive. And survival means knowing when to strike. The room remained deathly still as Yazurik's words sank in, his listeners gripping their drinks with claws, hands, or appendages. And Yazurik, perhaps for the first time since beginning his tale, smiled. It wasn't a smile of mirth, but of grim understanding. Survival isn't just an instinct for them, Yazurik continued, his voice slow and deliberate. It's their creed. Their greatest weapon isn't their technology, their numbers, or even their skill. It's their refusal to accept defeat. It's the way they take every failure, every setback, and forge it into something stronger, something deadlier. He paused to let the weight of his words settle over his audience. Yazurik's fingers traced the rim of his glass, his expression darkening further. You think I'm exaggerating? That I'm giving them too much credit? Then let me tell you what happened after Drexis 9. Let me tell you what they did when the Gorzarak tried to strike back. The bar's door swung shut behind Yazurik, but the echo of his story lingered, heavy and unrelenting. Outside, the sprawling neon skyline of Zarya 4's trade hub pulsed with life, a chaotic medley of blinking signs, hovering transports, and alien chatter. Yazurik adjusted his coat, the fabric heavy against his scarred shoulders, and let his feet guide him through the crowd. But the story he'd told refused to leave his mind. The memories were vivid, etched into his very being. The sound of Delaney's sniper fire, precise and haunting, still rang in his ears. The ground beneath him trembled with the ghost of explosions set off by Cruz's demolition charges. And always, the relentless, unyielding presence of Captain Locke, a figure who commanded respect through the sheer force of strategy and will. Yazurik hated them, but deep within that hate was the seed of admiration. He stopped at the edge of a bustling market square, its stalls glowing with the bioluminescence of imported flora and exotic goods. His claws scraped against the edge of a stone bench as he lowered himself, letting the noise wash over him. The night's cold seeped into his bones, but it wasn't the cold that made him shiver. It was the memory of that narrow canyon on Drexis 9. They had entered the canyon in HFY formation, a column of strength and pride. The Gorzarak didn't believe in stealth. They believed in overwhelming force. Yazurik had taken his place near the middle, his battle armor gleaming under the faint light of the planet's twin moons. Ahead of him marched the vanguard, a line of towering warriors wielding energy spears that hummed with destructive potential. Behind him, the engineers and support staff moved with calculated precision, their focus on maintaining the integrity of the operation. A narrow pass is a defensible position, Commander Kravix had said. His voice, deep and resonant, had filled the air with confidence. We hold this, and the planet's resources are ours. The humans will not risk an open assault. Yazurik had believed him then. Kravix was a tactician, revered for his victories in the Asheran rebellions. If he had any doubts, he didn't show them. But Yazurik now wondered if arrogance had blinded them all. The canyon was defensible, yes, but it was also a trap. One designed not by Kravix, but by Locke. The first explosion had shattered the silence of the night. It came from the rear, where Cruz had planted her charges with such precision that the resulting landslide cut off their retreat completely. Yazurik remembered the sight of boulders crashing down, their weight shaking the earth and sending dust clouds billowing into the air. He had turned to see their escape route vanish beneath a mountain of debris, panic rippling through the ranks. Then came the sniper fire. Delaney's shots pierced the darkness like whispers of death, each one finding its mark with unnerving accuracy. Officers fell, one after another, their commands silenced before they could even form. The Gorzarak's disciplined ranks faltered as confusion set in. Hold the line, Kravix had roared, his voice rising above the chaos. But it was no use. The humans weren't attacking in waves, they were dismantling the Gorzarak Battalion piece by piece. Yazurik clenched his fists, his claws digging into his palms as he sat on the stone bench. He could still see the flash of Sing's drones, their sleek forms darting through the canyon to sow havoc. Automated turrets turned against their operators, supply crates exploded without warning, and comm channels crackled with interference. Every step the humans took was calculated, every move designed to exploit their enemies' weaknesses. It wasn't just tactics, it was art. When the humans finally revealed themselves, they didn't do so in a grand charge or a dramatic declaration. They slipped through the chaos like ghosts, using the very terrain the Gorzarak had thought to dominate. Locke had led them, his dark eyes burning with determination. Yazurik had seen him briefly, his figure silhouetted against the flames of a sabotaged vehicle. He hadn't looked like a conqueror or a hero, he had looked like a survivor. The Gorzarak fought back, of course. Yazurik himself had taken down one of Sing's drones with a well-aimed plasma bolt. He had rallied a small group of warriors, their resolve hardening in the face of overwhelming odds. But for every victory they claimed, the humans countered with 10 more. Their resilience was maddening, their ingenuity infuriating. And then there was the moment Yazurik would never forget. Kravix, his armor battered and his weapon glowing with spent energy, had stood against Locke. It wasn't a fight of equals. It was a clash of philosophies. Kravix swung his energy spear with the brute force of a Gorzarak warrior, his every strike meant to crush. Locke dodged with precision, his movements efficient and deliberate. And then, with a single explosive charge planted at Kravix's feet, Locke ended the battle. The explosion had thrown Yazurik into a jagged rock wall, the impact shattering his helmet and sending pain lancing through his body. When he had regained consciousness, the canyon was silent. Smoke curled into the air, the acrid scent of burnt metal and scorched earth filling his nostrils. The humans were gone, leaving only destruction and the bodies of the fallen behind. Yazurik's mandibles clicked as he snapped back to the present. The market square was still bustling, oblivious to the storm raging in his mind. He looked down, at his hands, the claws that had once held weapons of war, and felt the weight of failure settle over him once more. "Yazurik," a voice called out. He turned to see an old friend, Gorvin, approaching. The smaller Gorzarak wore the uniform of a trade envoy, his posture more relaxed than Yazurik's rigid stance. "I heard you were back in the sector. It's been too long." Yazurik nodded in acknowledgement but said nothing. Gorvin took a seat beside him, his antennae twitching as he observed the warrior's somber expression. "Still haunted by Drexis 9? Gorvin asked gently. "How could I not be?" Yazurik replied, his voice low. "We underestimated them. We thought ourselves invincible." "You survived," Gorvin pointed out. "That's more than most can say. And you've learned. That's all we can do." Yazurik didn't respond immediately. His gaze drifted to the horizon, where the neon lights of Zarya 4 blurred into a distant haze. "Do you know why they fought us, Gorvin?" he finally asked. "For the tritium, I assume," Gorvin said, tilting his head. "No," Yazurik said, his voice firm. "They fought us because they had to. Because if they didn't, they knew we'd take everything from them. It wasn't about conquest, it was about survival." Gorvin's antennae drooped slightly, a sign of contemplation. "Perhaps that's what makes them so dangerous." "It is," Yazurik agreed. "And it's also what makes them impossible to forget." He paused, his expression darkening further. "But survival isn't just a human trait. It's universal. And now they've taught us how to wield it in ways we never imagined." As Yazurik leaned back against the bench, the distant glow of Zarya 4's skyline reflected in his eyes. His thoughts turned inward once more. The battle on Drexis 9 was over, but its lessons had only just begun. And in the deep void of his memory, he could still hear the voice of Captain Locke, a haunting echo of determination and cunning that Yazurik knew he would carry forever. But there was something more, an unsettling realization that had grown with time. For weeks after Drexus 9, Gorzarak had replayed the events in his mind. Every tactical decision, every calculated strike, and every moment of chaos. And each time he couldn't shake the feeling that Locke's team hadn't just fought to survive, they had fought to send a message. "We're not invincible," Gorzarak murmured aloud, his voice nearly drowned by the hum of the bustling square. Gorvin tilted his head, his antennae twitching curiously. "What do you mean?" "The humans' tactics," Gorzarak said, his eyes narrowing. "They didn't just fight. They studied us, adapted to us. They exploited our blind spots with a precision that felt deliberate." Gorvin frowned, his claws tapping lightly against the stone bench. "Are you suggesting they knew more about us than we thought?" Gorzarak nodded slowly. "It wasn't just survival. It was learning. Every move they made taught them something, knew about our weaknesses. Our pride, our overconfidence, our dependency on brute force. All of it became their weapons. If we meet them again, Gorvin, they won't just be the same humans. They'll be something far worse." A chill passed through Gorzarak as he spoke, the weight of his words sinking deep into his chest. Gorvin's usually calm demeanor cracked, his antennae drooping with visible unease. "Do you think they might come back?" "I don't." "No," Gorzarak admitted. "But if they do, we'll need to be ready. Not just with weapons, but with something we've never truly mastered." "What's that?" Gorvin asked. "Humility," Gorzarak replied simply. His mandibles clicked softly as he stood, his massive frame towering over the seated Gorvin. The market square buzzed around them, oblivious to the storm brewing in their conversation. Gorzarak glanced once more toward the horizon, the faint glow of distant stars just visible beyond the city's neon lights. "They humbled us once," Gorzarak said quietly, "and they'll do it again if we let them." With that, Gorzarak walked away, his steps heavy but purposeful, leaving Gorvin to sit alone with his thoughts. The trade envoy watched his old friend disappear into the crowd, the warrior's words lingering like the faint, bitter aftertaste of regret. And somewhere, in the far reaches of space, Gorvin couldn't help but wonder if Locke and his team were already preparing for the next encounter. The canyon was deathly silent, save for the faint hum of disrupted electronics and the eerie crackle of distant flames licking the fractured walls. Gorzarak's breath came in ragged gasps as he crouched behind a jagged outcrop of rock, his massive frame pressed tightly against the uneven surface. Every muscle in his body tensed as he scanned the shadows for movement, his glowing eyes searching for the unseen enemy that had already begun dismantling the Gorzarak Battalion with surgical precision. The climax of the battle was unfolding around. Him and the humans were no longer an enigma. They were a nightmare given form. Gorzarak's comm unit crackled with static, faint voices overlapping with screams and panicked shouts. Somewhere deep in the labyrinthine canyon, Commander Kravix's voice roared commands, his deep baritone rattling through the fractured frequencies. But Gorzarak knew the truth. Even Kravix's brilliance could not save them now. The first signs of chaos had come in the form of scattered explosions. Plasma mines meant to protect their defensive line had detonated prematurely, taking out an entire squad of Gorzarak warriors. Gorzarak had turned just in time to see the shockwave ripple through their position, sending armored bodies hurtling through the air. The humans had sabotaged their mines. Singh's work, undoubtedly. The tech specialist had turned their own defenses into instruments of death. "Sector 7 compromised," a voice called out over the comms, its owner's panic unmistakable. "Requesting reinforcements." Reinforcements never came. Gorzarak watched in horror as the automated turrets lining the canyon walls swiveled, their barrels glowing with lethal energy. For a fleeting moment, hope surged within him. The turrets would hold the line. But that hope shattered as the first volley of plasma bolts erupted, not toward the enemy, but toward the Gorzarak ranks. Singh's drones had infiltrated the network, and now their most reliable defenses were hunting them. Fallback positions. Kravix roared through the comms, his voice strained but unyielding. Regroup and counter-strike. Move now. Yazurik obeyed instinctively, his massive legs propelling him across the uneven terrain. The ground beneath him was littered with debris, broken weapons, scorched armor, and the remains of fallen warriors. The acrid scent of plasma burns filled his nostrils as he navigated the chaos, his claws scraping against the jagged rocks. As he rounded a corner, a sharp crack echoed through the canyon, followed by a muffled thud. Yazurik froze, his eyes narrowing. He knew that sound. Delaney. The sniper's precision was unmatched, each shot delivering death with cold efficiency. Another crack, another thud. Yazurik's mandibles twitched as he realized what was happening. Delaney was targeting their officers, systematically dismantling the chain of command. "Command, this is Yazurik," he barked into his comm unit, his voice low and urgent. "Sniper, fire in Sector 4. Officers down. Requesting countermeasures." The response was immediate, but not from his own side. "Acknowledged," a calm, human voice replied, its tone almost mocking. Yazurik's blood ran cold. They were listening. The humans had breached their communications, and now every call for help, every desperate plea, was being used against them. "Damn you," Yazurik growled under his breath, his claws flexing as he pressed forward. His training demanded action. Retreat was not an option. Yet every step he took brought him closer to the realization that this was not a battle. It was a slaughter. He reached a defensive position where a small group of Gorzarak warriors had managed to regroup. Their faces were grim, their once imposing frames now hunched with exhaustion. Yazurik took charge immediately, his deep voice cutting through the din. "We hold here," he ordered. "Focus fire on anything that moves. Cover each other's flanks. No one fights alone." The warriors nodded, their resolve hardening in the face of overwhelming odds. For a brief moment, Yazurik felt a flicker of hope. They were Gorzarak, after all. They had faced countless enemies and emerged victorious. Surely they could withstand this. That hope died as quickly as it had ignited. The first attack came without warning. A series of controlled detonations rippled through the canyon, collapsing sections of the rock walls and cutting off potential escape routes. Cruise's charges had been perfectly placed, each explosion designed to funnel the Gorzarak into kill zones. Yazurik's group barely had time to react as the ground beneath them shook violently, sending dust and debris cascading through the air. "Incoming!" one of the warriors shouted, his voice tinged with desperation. Yazurik turned just in time to see a sleek drone darting toward their position, its metallic surface glinting in the dim light. Without hesitation, he raised his plasma rifle and fired, the bolt striking the drone's core and reducing it to a fiery wreck. But for every drone he destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. The sky above the canyon swarmed with them, their buzzing a constant reminder of the humans' technological superiority. "Hold the line," Yazurik bellowed, his voice carrying over the chaos. "We fight for the Legion. We fight for our honor." The warriors rallied around him, their plasma rifles blazing as they unleashed a torrent of firepower. For a fleeting moment it seemed as though they might hold their ground. The drones fell in rapid succession, their charred remains scattering across the battlefield. But the humans were relentless. They pressed forward with an almost mechanical efficiency, their movements coordinated and precise. And then came Locke. The human commander emerged from the shadows like a specter, his dark eyes scanning the battlefield with cold calculation. He moved with purpose, his every step deliberate and unhurried. Yazurik recognized him instantly, the stories of his brilliance and ruthlessness flooding his mind. Locke raised a hand, and the chaos seemed to pause as if the canyon itself were holding its breath. "Target the leader," Locke said, his voice carrying effortlessly over the din. It was not a command shouted in desperation, but a statement of fact, as though the outcome were already decided. The drones shifted their focus, their metallic forms descending upon Yazarik's position like a swarm of locusts. Plasma bolts rained, down from above, forcing the Gorzarak to scatter. Yazurik stood his ground, his rifle spitting fire as he fought to protect his warriors. But it was futile. The drones were too many, their attacks too precise. One by one, the warriors fell. Yazurik watched helplessly as his comrades were cut down, their bodies crumpling beneath the relentless onslaught. His claws dug into the rocky ground as he fired his last shot, the rifle's charge depleted. A drone swooped toward him, its weapons primed to strike, and then the ground gave way. A final explosion, more powerful than the others, rippled through the canyon, collapsing the ledge beneath Yazarik's feet. He tumbled into the darkness, the roar of the blast echoing in his ears. Rocks and debris rained down around him, burying him in a suffocating embrace. Silence followed. Yazurik lay motionless, his massive frame pinned beneath the rubble. Pain radiated through his body, but it was the silence that terrified him most. The comms were dead, the voices of his comrades silenced forever. Somewhere above, Locke's voice rang out one final time, faint but unmistakable. "Mission accomplished. Pull out." As the sounds of retreating footsteps faded into the distance, Yazurik closed his eyes, his chest heaving with shallow breaths. He had survived, but he knew the truth. The Legion was gone. The humans had won, and they had done so with the precision and ruthlessness of true predators. The bar hummed with quiet murmurs as Yazurik finished recounting the battle. His towering frame slumped against the worn seat, his claws tracing the edge of the empty glass in his hand. Around him, the audience, a mix of mercenaries, traders, and curious drifters, sat in stunned silence. Even the barman had paused in his routine, his webbed fingers still clutching a damp rag. It was the barman who broke the silence, his voice low but steady. "You said the humans dismantled you, piece by piece, but what happened to you after?" Yazurik's glowing eyes flickered toward the amphibian, his mandibles clicking softly in contemplation. "I survived," he said after a long pause. "But survival is not the same as escape. I was trapped beneath the rubble for hours. The weight of stone and steel pressed against my body, each breath a struggle." The insectoid patron who had asked so many questions earlier leaned forward, his antennae twitching with curiosity. "And they left you? Just like that?" "Locke left nothing to chance," Yazurik replied, his voice laced with both bitterness and respect. "They scanned the battlefield for survivors, ensuring no one could regroup or retaliate. But luck, if you believe in such a thing, was on my side. The crevice I fell into was shielded by layers of debris, masking my presence. By the time I clawed my way out, they were gone. Vanished into the void, leaving nothing but ash and ruin behind." The eye. Barman nodded slowly, his wide amphibian eyes unblinking. "And you? What did you do after crawling out of that grave?" Yazurik's mandibles twitched as he stared into his empty glass. "I wandered. For days. Drexis 9 was silent, its surface scorched and lifeless. The Gorzarak fleet had abandoned the planet, assuming there were no survivors. By the time a coalition patrol found me, I was more dead than alive." The room grew even quieter, the weight of Yazurik's words settling heavily over the crowd. But before anyone could speak, the bar's door creaked open, its hinges groaning under the strain. A figure stepped inside, his silhouette framed by the neon lights of Zaria 4's bustling trade hub. The newcomer moved with a deliberate slowness, his gait steady despite the weariness in his step. His clothes were simple, a faded jacket and utility pants. but there was an air of authority about him, a quiet confidence that silenced the room as effectively as Yazurik's tale had. He scanned the bar, his gaze sharp but unassuming, until his eyes landed on Yazurik. Yazurik stiffened, his claws flexing instinctively. He knew that face, the sharp lines, the intense gaze, the faint scar tracing the man's jawline. It was him, Locke, Yazurik rumbled, his voice low and dangerous. The man, Captain Rowan Locke, gave a faint nod, his expression unreadable. He approached the table slowly, his boots clicking softly against the worn floor. The patrons watched, in stunned silence, their eyes darting between the towering Gorzarak warrior and the unassuming human who had just entered. "Yazurik," Locke said, his voice calm but firm. "It's been a long time." "Not long enough," Yazurik growled, his claws digging into the table. "What do you want?" Locke held up a hand, a gesture of peace. "To talk, nothing more." The barman, sensing the tension, cleared his throat nervously. "Should I get another round?" Locke gave a faint smile. "That would be appreciated." Yazurik said nothing as the barman scurried away, returning moments later with 2 glasses of amber liquid. Locke took a seat across from Yazurik, his movements deliberate and unthreatening. For a long moment, neither spoke. The bar's patrons watched with bated breath, the tension thick enough to cut with a blade. "You told them the story," Locke said finally, gesturing subtly toward the gathered crowd. "About Drexis 9. "I told them the truth," Yazurik replied, his voice cold. "How you destroyed us, how you hunted us like animals." Locke's expression remained neutral, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Regret, perhaps. Or understanding. "It wasn't personal," he said softly. "You know that." "It was war," Yazurik spat, his mandibles clicking sharply. "War you waged with precision and cruelty." "War we waged to survive," Locke countered, his tone firm but not unkind. "We didn't come to Drexis 9 to conquer. We came to protect what little we had left. You would have done the same." Yazurik leaned back in his chair, his massive frame casting a shadow over the table. For a long moment, he said nothing, his glowing eyes fixed on Locke. Finally, he spoke, his voice heavy with resignation. "You're not the same man you were then." Locke shook his head. "No, I'm not. None of us are. War changes everyone." The barman, emboldened by the lessening tension, cleared his throat. "If you don't mind me asking, what are you now, Captain?" Locke glanced at him, a faint smile touching his lips. "A veteran," he said simply, "a man who's seen too much and done too much. I don't fight anymore. There are others to carry that burden now." "And what burden do you carry?" Yazurik asked, his tone softer but still wary. Locke met. His gaze, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "The burden of memory," he said, "of knowing what we did and why we did it, and of hoping that someday it won't be necessary again." The room fell silent once more, the weight of Locke's words settling over the gathered patrons. Yazurik studied him for a long moment, his mandibles twitching thoughtfully. Finally, he nodded, a gesture of reluctant respect. "You're right," Yazurik said quietly. "It wasn't personal, but it's not something I can forgive." Locke inclined his head. "I wouldn't expect you to." The 2 men sat in silence, their shared history stretching between them like an unbridgeable chasm. Around them, the bar slowly returned to life, the patrons speaking in hushed tones as they processed what they had just witnessed. As Locke rose to leave, he placed a hand on the table, his gaze meeting Yazurik's one last time. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you survived." Yazurik didn't reply, his glowing eyes following Locke as he walked toward the door. The human paused briefly at the threshold, the neon lights casting his silhouette in sharp relief. Then he was gone, swallowed by the bustling streets of Zarya 4. The barman let out a shaky breath, his webbed fingers trembling as he reached for Yazurik's empty glass. "You think you'll ever see him again?" he asked hesitantly. Yazurik's mandibles clicked softly as he stood, his massive frame towering over the table. "If I do," he said, his voice low and steady, "it won't be as enemies." With that, he turned and walked toward the door, leaving the bar and its patrons behind. Outside, the neon-lit streets buzzed with life, but Yazurik's thoughts were far away, lost in the echoes of a battle that had defined him, and a man who had changed the course of his life forever.